I found the listing on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before my eviction notice expired. The rent was impossibly low, $600 a month for a 3-bedroom house in rural Oregon, about 40 minutes outside of Portland. The photos showed a modest craftsman-style home with weathered siding, surrounded by dense forest. It looked isolated, peaceful even. I should have known better. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a freelance graphic designer. After my relationship with my ex-girlfriend imploded and I lost my apartment, I was desperate for anywhere to live that wouldn't drain my dwindling savings. The listing described the property as historic, charming, requires responsible tenant willing to follow house guidelines. The guidelines part seemed normal enough. No smoking, no unauthorized modifications, maintain the yard. Standard landlord stuff. I called the number listed. A woman answered on the first ring, her voice pleasant but businesslike. She introduced herself as Mrs. Vera Holloway, the property manager for the owner who preferred to remain anonymous. The house has been in the family for generations, she explained. The owner is very particular about its care. There are certain protocols that must be followed. I'm very responsible, I assured her, already imagining myself moved in. I can follow whatever rules are necessary. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Can you come view it tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock sharp? I agreed immediately. The drive took me through increasingly rural terrain. Towering Douglas firs lined the narrow road, their branches creating a canopy that filtered the morning sunlight into greenish shadows. I passed maybe 3 other houses in the last 10 miles, each one set far back from the road, half hidden by overgrowth. Mrs. Holloway was waiting in the driveway when I arrived, standing beside a black sedan that looked like it belonged to a funeral director. She was in her 60s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her handshake was firm, almost aggressive. "Mr. Chen," she said, studying me with pale gray eyes. "Thank you for your punctuality. The owner values that quality." The house looked better in person than in the photos. Larger, with a wraparound porch and intricate woodwork around the windows. The paint was peeling in places, and the yard needed work, but there was something undeniably appealing about it, something that felt like possibility. "It's perfect," I said. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Mrs. Holloway replied, producing an old brass key from her pocket. "First, you need to understand what living here entails." She led me through the front door into a spacious living room. Hardwood floors, high ceilings, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The furniture was old but well maintained. A leather sofa, 2 armchairs, a coffee table with intricate carved legs. Everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. Cedar, maybe? Or sage? "The house comes furnished," Mrs. Holloway explained. "Nothing is to be removed or significantly altered. The owner is very attached to these pieces." We toured the rest of the first floor, a dining room with a table that could seat 8, a kitchen with vintage appliances that surprisingly seemed functional, a small bathroom with black and white tile. Everything was clean, organized, preserved like a museum. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms and a larger bathroom. The master bedroom overlooked the backyard, which stretched into thick forest. The other 2 bedrooms were smaller, sparsely furnished with beds and dressers. The bathroom had a clawfoot tub and a medicine cabinet with a mirror that had a strange, slightly distorted quality when I looked at my reflection. "The basement," Mrs. Holloway said as we returned downstairs, "is off limits, completely and absolutely. The door remains locked at all times." She pointed to a door beneath the staircase, painted the same white as the walls, but somehow more prominent, like it was demanding attention despite trying to blend in. A heavy padlock secured it.
Structural issues? I asked. Something like that, she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. The owner is addressing it. In the meantime, no entry. That's non-negotiable. Fair enough, I said, though something about the door made my skin prickle. Mrs. Holloway led me back to the living room and produced a thick folder from her briefcase. The lease agreement, she said, and the house rules. Both must be signed and followed precisely. The lease was standard: 1-year commitment, first and last month's rent, security deposit. But the house rules document was something else entirely. It was printed on thick, cream-colored paper that felt almost like vellum. The text formatted in an old-fashioned font that was difficult to read. "Take your time," Mrs. Holloway said, settling into one of the armchairs. "These rules exist for very specific reasons. Breaking them has consequences." I began reading. House Rules for 1847 Blackwood Lane. Rule 1. All exterior doors must be locked by 9 p.m. and remain locked until sunrise. Under no circumstances should any door be opened during these hours, regardless of what you may hear outside. Rule 2. The fireplace in the living room must have a fire burning from sunset to sunrise every night between October 1st and April 30th. The fire must never be allowed to go out completely during these hours. Firewood is provided in the shed behind the house. Rule 3. Every Sunday at exactly 3 p.m., place a small offering of salt and bread on the kitchen windowsill. Leave it until Monday morning, then dispose of it by burying it in the backyard, at least 10 feet from the house. Rule 4. If you hear footsteps in the attic, do not investigate. They will stop on their own. Attempting to access the attic is forbidden. Rule 5. The mirror in the upstairs bathroom must be covered with a cloth between midnight and 6 a.m. A suitable cloth is provided in the linen closet. Rule 6. If you encounter a door that you do not remember seeing before, do not open it. Mark its location with a piece of tape and inform Mrs. Holloway immediately. Rule 7. Never bring cut flowers into the house. Live potted plants are acceptable, but nothing that has been severed from its roots. Rule 8. If the telephone rings 3 times and stops, do not answer it if it rings again immediately after. Wait at least 5 minutes before answering any subsequent calls. Rule 9. The basement door must never be unlocked or opened. If you hear sounds emanating from behind it, play music or television at a reasonable volume. Do not attempt to investigate. Rule 10. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., if you are awake, remain in your bedroom with the door closed. If you must use the bathroom during this time, do so quickly and do not linger in the hallway or look into any rooms with open doors. Rule 11. If you smell smoke but cannot locate a fire, open all windows on the first floor for exactly 15 minutes, then close and lock them. Do not call emergency services unless you see actual flames. Rule 12. Never count the windows from outside the house. The number may not match what you observe from inside. This is normal and should not be investigated. Rule 13. If you see a figure standing in the backyard facing the house, do not make eye contact. Close the curtains calmly and go about your business. The figure will leave on its own. Rule 14. Once per month, on the first Friday, Leave the house vacant between 6 p.m. and midnight. Sleep elsewhere or remain in your vehicle parked on the main road. Do not return until 12:01 a.m. Rule 15. If an object in the house moves to a different location than where you placed it, move it back once. If it moves again, leave it in the new location. The house is deciding where things belong. Rule 16. If you hear an animal calling your name in a human voice, do not respond, and do not go outside. Close all curtains and play music or television until the calling stops. This is extremely important. Rule 17. If you see a person you know standing outside the house after dark, call that person before opening the door. If they are at home or elsewhere, do not acknowledge what is outside. It is not them. I looked up from the document, my mouth dry. This is unusual. Mrs. Holloway's expression remained neutral. The owner takes the preservation of this property very seriously. These guidelines have been developed over many years to maintain the house's integrity. But some of these rules don't make logical sense. Covering mirrors, not counting windows, animals calling in human voices? There's no rational explanation for... Rationality, Mrs. Holloway interrupted, is not required. Only compliance. The previous tenant lasted 18 months by following these rules meticulously. The tenant before that, she trailed off, her gaze drifting toward the locked basement door. Well, they did not fare as well. What happened to them? They broke the rules, she said simply. The house is very old, Mr. Chen.
Old houses have their peculiarities, and the land itself. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. This property was built on ground that the local tribes considered forbidden. There are things in these woods that predate our understanding, things that wear familiar faces but aren't what they seem. You're talking about skinwalkers, I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue. I'd read about them, Navajo legends of witches who could take animal form, who mimicked voices, who wore the skins of their victims. Mrs. Holloway's expression hardened. I'm talking about following the rules, Mr. Chen. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that these protocols have kept tenants safe for over a century. Ignore them at your peril. And if I don't, her pale eyes held mine, then you'll learn why the previous tenant's belongings are still in the shed, waiting to be claimed by family that never came. She released my arm and stepped back, her professional smile returning. Welcome to Blackwood Lane, Mr. Chen. I sincerely hope your tenancy is a long and uneventful one. I moved in on a Friday, hauling my modest possessions, mostly clothes, computer equipment, and a few boxes of personal items, into the house over the course of a few hours. My friend Jake helped, though he grew increasingly uncomfortable the longer we stayed. Dude, this place has a weird vibe, he said, as we carried my desk up the stairs. Are you sure about this? It's just an old house, I replied, though I'd noticed it too. The air inside felt different somehow, thicker, more resistant to movement. And there were sounds, not quite creaks or groans, but something more subtle, like breathing, but so quiet you could convince yourself you were imagining it. What's with all the rules? Jake had read through the document I'd left on the kitchen counter. This is some serious horror movie shit. Salt and bread offerings? Not opening doors after dark? Animals calling your name? Marcus, this is insane. It's eccentric, I corrected. The owner is obviously superstitious, but the rent is $600 a month, Jake. $600 for this whole house? He shook his head, but didn't argue further. We finished moving everything in by late afternoon. Jake left before sunset, citing an early morning obligation, though I suspected he just wanted to get away from the house. "Call me if anything weird happens," he said as he climbed into his truck, and I mean actually weird, not just old house noises. "It'll be fine," I assured him. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing down the tree-lined road. Then I was alone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I checked my phone, 6:47 p.m. According to the rules, I needed to start a fire soon and lock all the doors by 9. It seemed ridiculous in the early evening light, but I'd signed the agreement. Might as well start things off properly. The shed behind the house was larger than I'd expected, filled with neatly stacked firewood and various tools. Everything was organized with almost obsessive precision. Rakes hanging at exact intervals, shovels arranged by size, bags of supplies labeled and dated. In one corner, I noticed a pile of boxes covered with a tarp, personal belongings, I assumed, the previous tenants. I grabbed an armload of wood and carried it inside, arranging it in the fireplace according to half-remembered camping trips from my childhood. It took me 3 tries and way too many matches, but eventually I got a decent fire going. As darkness fell, the house transformed. Shadows collected in corners, seeming to pulse with the flickering firelight. The old wood creaked and settled, producing sounds that almost resembled footsteps or whispered conversations. I turned on lights throughout the first floor, pushing back the darkness, but it felt futile. The shadows always remained, just at the edges. At 8:55 p.m., I went around locking doors. Front door, check. Back door, check. Side door off the kitchen that I hadn't noticed during the tour, check. I tested each one twice, making sure they were secure. By 9 o'clock, I was locked in for the night. I tried to settle into my new space, unpacking boxes and arranging my computer equipment in one of the spare bedrooms I'd designated as my office. But concentration eluded me. Every sound drew my attention. The fire crackling, the wind against the windows, that odd, almost breathing quality to the air. Around 10:30 p.m., I heard them for the first time. Footsteps. Above me, in the attic. They were slow, deliberate, moving from one end of the house to the other. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm was too steady to be random settling, too purposeful. Rule 4 echoed in my mind. If you hear footsteps in the attic, do not investigate. They will stop on their own. I sat frozen in the living room, my laptop forgotten, listening to whatever was walking above me. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes. Then they stopped, as suddenly as they'd begun. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I forced myself to breathe normally, to rationalize what I'd heard. Old houses made noise. The temperature drop at night caused wood to contract, creating sounds that could resemble footsteps. It was simple physics, nothing supernatural. But I didn't believe myself. At midnight, I remembered Rule 5, the bathroom mirror. I climbed the stairs slowly, hyper-aware of every creak, every shadow. The upstairs hallway seemed longer than I remembered, stretching away into darkness that my overhead light couldn't quite penetrate. The bathroom mirror showed my reflection, tired, anxious, already regretting my decision to live here. I found the cloth in the linen closet, a heavy black fabric that felt like velvet. As I draped it over the mirror, I could have sworn I saw movement in the reflection just before the cloth fell into place, a figure standing behind me. But when I spun around, the bathroom was empty. I retreated to my bedroom, closed the door, and climbed into bed fully clothed. Sleep seemed impossible,
But eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I dreamed of doors, endless doors, appearing and disappearing in walls that shifted and flowed like water. Each door was different, some modern, some ancient, some made of materials I didn't recognize. They all stood closed, but I could hear things behind them. Whispers, scratching, crying. In the dream, I reached for a doorknob that looked like it was made of bone. As my fingers closed around it, a voice spoke directly into my ear. Not yet. I woke gasping, sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. Morning. I'd survived my first night.
Locking doors became automatic. The fireplace ritual, initially a nuisance, became almost meditative. I even remembered the Sunday offering, a small pile of salt and a heel of bread on the kitchen windowsill at precisely 3 p.m. The footsteps came every night, always between 10 and 11 p.m., always the same steady rhythm. I learned to ignore them, turning up my music or focusing intently on work until they stopped. But other things happened that the rules didn't cover. Objects moved. Not dramatically. I'd find my coffee mug in a different spot than where I'd left it, or a book on a shelf I was certain I'd placed on the coffee table. Following Rule 15, I tried moving them back once. When they appeared in the new locations again, I left them. The house was deciding where things belonged. I also noticed the temperature variations. Some rooms stayed cold, regardless of the heating, while others grew uncomfortably warm. The living room was always comfortable, almost perfectly climate-controlled, but the dining room remained perpetually chilly. My office fluctuated wildly. Sometimes I'd work in a t-shirt, other times I needed a sweater, despite the thermostat reading the same temperature. And there were the smells. They came and went without warning. Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of perfume, floral and old-fashioned. Other times, the scent of pipe tobacco would fill a room, even though I didn't smoke. Once, passing the basement door, I smelled earth and dampness and something else, something organic and rotten that made my stomach turn. But the most unsettling thing was the phone. It was an old rotary model, built into the kitchen wall, that I'd assumed didn't work. But on my 5th night, it rang 3 times at 11:43 p.m. I was in the living room, monitoring the fire, when the harsh jangling cut through the silence. Ring, ring, ring. Then silence. My heart hammered as I stared at the phone. Rule 8. If the telephone rings 3 times and stops, do not answer it if it rings again immediately after. The phone rang again. Not 3 times, continuously, insistently. I let it ring, my hands clenched into fists. After 12 rings, it stopped. 5 minutes later, after the longest 5 minutes of my life, I cautiously picked up the receiver. Hello? Static. Then Mrs. Holloway's voice, crystal clear. Mr. Chen, just checking in. How are you settling in? Fine, I managed. Everything's fine. Following the rules? Yes, all of them. Good, very good. You know, the house has a way of testing new tenants, pushing boundaries. It's important to establish early that you're in charge, that you won't be manipulated. I'm not sure I understand. You will, she said. Remember, Mr. Chen, the house is old, but it's not in charge. You are. As long as you follow the rules, you maintain the authority. Break them, and, well, the balance shifts. Mrs. Holloway, what exactly is this place? What happened to the previous tenant? The line went dead. Sunday came, and with it the offering ritual.
I followed the instructions precisely. A small pile of salt, a piece of bread, placed on the kitchen windowsill at 3 p.m. exactly. It felt absurd, like something from a fairy tale or a pagan ritual. But I did it anyway. Monday morning, I went to dispose of the offering as directed. The bread was gone, but the salt remained, arranged in a pattern I hadn't created. It looked almost like symbols, circles and lines that suggested meaning I couldn't interpret. Following the rules, I buried everything 10 feet from the house in a spot near the tree line. As I dug, I noticed other disturbed patches of earth nearby. How many offerings had been buried here over the years? Decades of weekly rituals, feeding what? The house? Something in it? That afternoon, while working in my office, I heard a sound I'd never heard before. Music. Faint, barely audible, coming from somewhere in the house. It sounded like a piano, playing a melody that was both beautiful and profoundly sad. I followed the sound, room by room, until I realized it was coming from behind the basement door. The music grew louder as I approached, clear enough now that I could make out individual notes. It was a classical piece, something I vaguely recognized but couldn't name. The playing was expert, flawless, impossible, because there was no piano in the basement. Mrs. Halloway had told me it was structurally unsound, off limits, locked for my safety. But someone, or something, was down there playing music. Rule 9. If you hear sounds emanating from behind it, play music or television at a reasonable volume.
I retreated to the living room, turned on the TV, and raised the volume until I could no longer hear the phantom piano. The sound from the basement continued for another hour before finally fading away. That night, something changed. I was in bed, drifting towards sleep, when I heard it. My mother's voice, calling from outside. "Marcus! Marcus, honey! Please let me in!" I bolted upright, my heart racing. My mother lived 3 states away. There was no way she could be here, standing outside my house at, I checked my phone, 11:47 p.m. "Marcus, please! I drove all this way to see you! I'm worried about you in this place!" Her voice sounded exactly right. The tone, the inflection, the slight tremor of maternal concern, everything about it was perfect, authentic, undeniable. I got out of bed and moved to the window. Through the curtains, I could see a figure standing in the driveway, illuminated by the porch light. A woman, the right height, the right build, wearing clothes my mother would wear. "Marcus, why won't you answer me? It's cold out here." My hand was on the curtain, ready to pull it aside for a better look, when Rule 16 crashed into my consciousness. If you hear an animal calling your name in a human voice, do not respond and do not go outside. But this wasn't an animal voice. This was my mother. Or was it? I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called my mother's cell. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Marcus? Honey, it's almost midnight. Are you okay?" "Mom, where are you right now?" "What? I'm in bed. Where else would I be?" Outside, the voice continued calling. "Marcus! Marcus, please! Why are you being so cruel?" Rule 17 flooded my mind. If you see a person you know standing outside the house after dark, call that person before opening the door. If they are at home or elsewhere, do not acknowledge what is outside. "Mom, I'm fine. I wanted to hear your voice. Go back to sleep." "Are you sure you're okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine, really.
Talk to you tomorrow." I hung up and stood frozen in my bedroom, listening to the thing outside that wore my mother's voice. It called for another 10 minutes, growing increasingly agitated, before finally falling silent. When I dared to look out the window, the driveway was empty.
But in the morning, I found tracks, not human footprints, something with claws, walking on 2 legs, each print showing 4 long splayed toes that had pressed deep into the soft earth. And mixed with the tracks was a smell, wild and musky, like wet dog, and something else, something that made my hindbrain scream predator. I called Mrs. Holloway first thing that morning. She answered immediately, as if she'd been expecting my call. "It came last night," I said without preamble. "Something that sounded like my mother. I followed the rules. I didn't let it in." "Good," she said, and I could hear relief in her voice. "Very good, Mr. Chen. You passed an important test." "A test? That thing could have..." "But it didn't, because you followed the rules. The entity that visited you last night is old, Mr. Chen. Older than the house, older than the town. It's been in these woods for longer than we have records. The local tribes have stories about it, warnings passed down through generations." "You're talking about a skinwalker?" She was silent for a moment. "That's one name for it. There are others. Yi Naldoshi. The Navajo have their legends, but similar creatures exist in other cultures. Wendigo, Nalusafalaya, things that wear stolen faces and mimic familiar voices. This particular entity has been bound to this land for generations. It cannot enter the house as long as the rules are followed, as long as the offerings are made. But it tests boundaries. It probes for weaknesses. Why didn't you warn me more explicitly?" "Because knowledge changes behavior, Mr. Chen. If you'd known what to expect, you might have hesitated. Doubt would have shown on your face, in your body language. These creatures sense uncertainty. They exploit it. Better that you reacted instinctively, following the rules, because that's what you'd agreed to do." "And if I'd opened the door?" Another pause. "Then we would have needed to find a new tenant." After hanging up, I went outside to examine the tracks more closely. In daylight, they were even more disturbing. Whatever had made them was large. The stride length suggested something at least 7 feet tall. The claw marks were deep, indicating significant weight and strength. I followed the tracks backward, tracing their path from the driveway into the tree line. They emerged from the forest about 50 feet from the house, took a direct path to the front door, then paced back and forth across the driveway before returning to the woods. At the edge of the trees, I found something that made my blood run cold. Caught on a low branch was a tuft of fur, coarse, grayish-brown, matted with something that looked like dried blood. And beneath it, partially hidden in the undergrowth, was a piece of clothing. A scarf, blue with white snowflakes. My mother owned a scarf exactly like that. I'd given it to her 3 Christmases ago. But she was in Arizona, 3 states away, safe in her home. So how did this thing have her scarf? I didn't touch it. Instead, I took a photo with my phone and retreated to the house. Once inside, I locked all the doors, even though it was midday, even though the rules only mandated locking them at night. I checked every window, making sure they were latched. I built up the fire, even though it wasn't required during daylight hours. For the first time since moving in, I felt genuinely unsafe.
Not just uneasy or anxious, but actively threatened. Something was out there that could look like my mother, sound like my mother, and somehow obtain her belongings. Something that wanted inside my house. And it knew my name. The next few days passed in a state of hypervigilance. I jumped at every sound. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I caught myself repeatedly checking the locks, peering out windows, searching the tree line for movement. The worst part was the not knowing. I couldn't tell if the thing was still out there, watching, waiting. During the day, the forest looked peaceful, just trees and undergrowth, birds calling, squirrels darting between branches. But I knew something else was there too, something that didn't belong in the natural order. At night, I heard things, scratching at the walls, soft impacts against the windows, like someone testing the glass. Once, I woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of the doorknob on my bedroom door turning slowly, testing the lock I'd installed. I lay frozen in bed, barely breathing until the sound stopped. The footsteps in the attic changed too. They became heavier, more deliberate, sometimes accompanied by dragging sounds, as if something was being pulled across the floor. And occasionally, I heard voices up there.
Conversations in low tones, too muffled to make out words, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. On Thursday night, a week after the mother impersonator incident, it came back. I was in the living room, maintaining the fire, when I heard scratching at the back door. Not aggressive, not violent, almost gentle, like someone lightly dragging their fingernails across the wood. Then Jake's voice. "Marcus, dude, let me in. My car broke down on the road. My phone's dead. Come on, man, it's freezing out here." Every instinct screamed at me to open the door. Jake was my friend. He'd helped me move in. If he was stranded, I should help him. But Rule 17 was clear. I called Jake. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear music and laughter in the background. "Marcus, hey man, what's up? Where are you?" "Brewster's, the sports bar downtown. It's trivia night. Why?" Outside, the scratching continued. Jake's voice called again. "Marcus, I can hear you in there. Why won't you help me?" "No reason," I told the real Jake. "Just checking in. Have fun." I hung up and stared at the back door. The scratching had stopped, but I could sense something on the other side, waiting, listening. "I know what you are," I said aloud, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're not my friend. You can't come in." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in the air. The fire flickered as if a cold wind had passed through, even though all the doors and windows were sealed. Then I heard it, not Jake's voice anymore, but something else. A sound that was almost words, but wrong, backwards and distorted, like a recording played in reverse. The tone was mocking, amused, patient. It was telling me that it had time, that eventually I would make a mistake, that everyone did, eventually. The scratching started again, but different now, rhythmic, deliberate. It took me a moment to recognize the pattern. It was mimicking a heartbeat, my heartbeat, matching the tempo of my own racing pulse. Then, abruptly, it stopped. Silence filled the house, so complete that my ears rang with it. I stayed up all night, feeding the fire, watching the doors, listening for any sign of the creature's return. But it had gone, retreating into the forest to wait for another opportunity. They circled the entire house this time, stopping at each door and window as if cataloging entry points, testing for weaknesses. At the back door, where it had scratched, I found gouges in the wood, 4 parallel lines that went deep, cutting through layers of paint to the bare wood beneath. And at each corner of the house, it had left a marker, small piles of stones arranged in cairns with something placed on top of each one. At the front right corner, it was a lock of dark hair. At the back right, a photograph, too degraded and faded to make out the faces, but clearly showing people standing in front of this house. At the back left corner, a bird skeleton, perfectly intact, laid out as if in display. And at the front left corner, the one closest to my bedroom window, it had left my mother's scarf. I gathered all of them using gloves, refusing to touch any of the items directly, and burned them in the fireplace. As they burned, the flames turned strange colors, green and blue and purple, and the smoke smelled like sulfur and decay. The house groaned around me, timbers settling, as if reacting to the burning, or perhaps approving. I couldn't tell which. That night, I broke a rule. Not intentionally, but the result was the same. I'd fallen asleep on the couch while monitoring the fire, exhausted from poor sleep and mounting anxiety. When I woke, disoriented, my phone showed 3:17 a.m. I was thirsty, my mouth dry from breathing the fire-heated air. Without thinking, I got up and walked toward the kitchen. It wasn't until I reached the hallway that I remembered Rule 10. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., if you are awake, remain in your bedroom with the door closed. I froze, suddenly hyper-aware of the darkness around me. The living room fire provided some light, but the hallway stretched into shadow. Every door stood open, the dining room, the bathroom, the spare bedroom, all of them dark, empty spaces that now felt like open mouths. Common sense warred with thirst. I was already in the hallway. The kitchen was just ahead. It would take 30 seconds to get water and return to the couch. I kept walking. The kitchen was darker than the hallway, the windows reflecting nothing but my own frightened face. I fumbled for the light switch, my hand trembling.
When the fluorescent light flickered on, everything looked normal. Empty counter, clean sink, my coffee maker in its designated spot. I filled a glass from the tap, drank quickly, and turned to leave. That's when I saw it. In the reflection on the window above the sink, the same window where I placed the weekly offering, there was something that wasn't there in the actual kitchen. A door. It stood against the far wall, where I knew for certain no door existed. It was made of dark wood, with an ornate handle that glinted in the window's reflection. As I watched, the handle began to turn. I spun around. The actual wall was blank, no door, nothing but the original wallpaper, faded and slightly water-stained. But in the window's reflection, the door was opening. Something was coming through. I could see it in the reflection, a figure hunched and wrong, its proportions not quite human. It moved with a jerking, stuttering gait, like a film with frames missing. And then it spoke, using my mother's voice. "Marcus, why did you abandon me?" I ran. Not a panic-stricken flight, but a controlled, deliberate retreat. Back through the hallway, past those open doors that now seemed to watch my passage, into the living room. I fed the fire with shaking hands, building it higher, brighter, pushing back the darkness. The clock showed 3:29 a.m., still within the forbidden hours. I sat on the couch, facing the hallway, watching for what? Movement? Shapes in the darkness? A door that couldn't exist but somehow did? Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned my head slowly, not wanting to look,
but unable to stop myself. There, in the dining room doorway, stood a figure. It was tall, too tall, and stood completely still. In the flickering firelight, I could make out details that made my stomach clench. It wore clothing that resembled my mother's style, a cardigan, slacks, but everything hung wrong, like a costume on a mannequin. The proportions were off, the arms too long, the torso too narrow, the head tilted at an angle that no human neck could sustain. I couldn't see its face. Shadows obscured the features, or perhaps there were no features to see. Just smooth, blank skin stretched over bone. It stood there, watching me, waiting. I remembered Mrs. Halloway's words. The house is old, but it's not in charge. You are.
As long as you follow the rules, you maintain the authority. But I'd broken Rule 10. I'd left my bedroom during the forbidden hours. I'd wandered the hallways. And now, something had gotten in. Or perhaps it had always been here, waiting for me to make this exact mistake. "You're not welcome here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure's head tilted further, impossibly far, until it was nearly perpendicular to its shoulders. When it spoke, it used my mother's voice again, but distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "You invited me in, Marcus, when you opened that door, when you looked. The door wasn't real, it was just a reflection. All reflections are doorways. All thresholds are invitations. You know this now." It took a step into the living room. In the firelight, I could see its feet, or what should have been feet. Instead, there were paws, massive and clawed, covered in coarse gray fur. But from the ankles up, it wore my mother's slacks. The fabric stretched tight over legs that bent backward at the knee. This wasn't a ghost or a spirit. This was something that had stolen pieces of my mother's identity, her voice, her clothing, her mannerisms, and was wearing them like a costume, a predator's camouflage, a skinwalker. "The rules say you can't come in," I said, gripping the poker from the fireplace. It was iron. I'd noticed that detail when I'd first examined it. Iron was supposed to work against evil things, according to folklore. The house is protected. "The house is hungry," it replied. And now the voice was changing, cycling through others. Jake's voice, Mrs. Halloway's voice, my father's voice, though he'd been dead for 5 years. "The house is always hungry. It feeds on those who break the rules. And you, Marcus Chen, have broken Rule 10. It took another step closer. I could smell it now. That wild, musky scent, mixed with something rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. "Between 2 and 4 a.m., you should have stayed in your bedroom. But you're here, in the space between. The liminal hours, when the house's protection is weakest." Another step. Its shadow stretched across the floor, far too large for its body. And in the shadow, I could see its true shape. Something massive, quadrupedal, with a head that was too elongated to be wolf or coyote or dog.
Something ancient and wrong. "But you know what's interesting?" it continued, still cycling through stolen voices. "You didn't invite me inside. I was already here. I've always been here. The house and I, we made our arrangement long ago." The fire flared suddenly, shooting sparks up the chimney.
The skinwalker flinched backward, its stolen human facade slipping for just a moment. In that instant, I saw what was underneath. Gray-brown fur, yellow eyes that reflected the firelight like mirrors, a muzzle full of too many teeth. Then it reassembled itself, pulling the human appearance back on like a mask. "The fire," I said, understanding. "Rule 2. That's why the fire must never go out." "Smart boy." It was my father's voice now, warm and proud, which made it so much worse. "The fire keeps the darkness at bay, keeps certain things confined to the spaces where they belong. But you're out here with me now, Marcus, in the same space, the same shadow." I glanced at the clock. 3:44 a.m., 16 more minutes until the forbidden hours ended. I just had to survive 16 minutes. "The house protects those who follow the rules," I said, more to reassure myself than anything else. "That's what Mrs. Holloway said." "Vera Holloway." The skinwalker laughed, and it was the most terrible sound I'd ever heard. Like glass breaking and metal scraping and animals dying all at once. Then it reassembled itself, pulling the human appearance back on like a mask. "The fire," I said, understanding. "Rule 2. That's why the fire must never go out." "Smart boy." It was my father's voice now, warm and proud, which made it so much worse. "The fire keeps the darkness at bay, keeps certain things confined to the spaces where they belong. But you're out here with me now, Marcus, in the same space, the same shadow." I glanced at the clock. 3:44 a.m., 16 more minutes until the forbidden hours ended. I just had to survive 16 minutes. "The house protects those who follow the rules," I said, more to reassure myself than anything else. "That's what Mrs. Holloway said." "Vera Holloway." The skinwalker laughed, and it was the most terrible sound I'd ever heard. Like glass breaking and metal scraping and animals dying all at once. "The house feeds," the skinwalker said softly. "The house remembers. And when it's time, when it's hungry enough, it takes what it needs." The previous tenant? He's still here. He's part of the house now, part of the walls and the floors and the foundation. "No," I said, but my voice wavered. "Check the basement, Marcus, if you dare. Though Rule 9 says you shouldn't, doesn't it? And you've already broken one rule tonight. What's one more?" The clock showed 3:51 a.m. 9 more minutes. The skinwalker took another step forward, close enough now that I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from it. Close enough to see the seams where the stolen skin didn't quite fit together, the places where fur peeked through, the joints that bent in ways human joints couldn't. "I could take you now," it whispered in my mother's voice. "You've broken the rules. The house's protection is void. I could wear your face, Marcus, your voice, call your friends and family, and they'd never know it wasn't you. Not until it was too late." The fire was dying. I'd been so focused on the creature that I'd forgotten to feed it. The flames were down to coals, the light dimming, and as the darkness crept in, the skinwalker grew more solid, more real. I grabbed a log from the pile beside the hearth and threw it on the fire. It caught immediately, flames leaping up, and the skinwalker hissed and stumbled backward. "Iron and fire," I said, my confidence growing. "That's why these tools are iron. That's why the fire must never go out. You can't touch me as long as the fire burns." "Tonight," it agreed, retreating toward the dining room. "But there are other nights, Marcus Chen. So many other nights ahead of you. And eventually, you'll make another mistake. You'll forget to lock a door. Or you'll look when you shouldn't. Or you'll answer when something calls. And I'll be waiting." It paused in the doorway, its form beginning to shimmer and shift. "We'll see each other again. And next time, I'll be wearing someone you love." Then it was gone, dissolving into shadow, leaving behind only that musky scent and the faint sound of claws clicking on hardwood, fading into the distance. The clock struck 4 a.m. The forbidden hours were over. I stayed on the couch until sunrise, feeding the fire, watching the doorways, unable to shake the feeling that the skinwalker's words held a terrible truth.
When morning finally came, I noticed something I'd missed in the darkness. On the coffee table, arranged in a neat row, were items that hadn't been there before. My mother's driver's license, a piece of paper with Jake's phone number written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine, a photograph of my father from before he died, a lock of hair that matched my own dark brown color, and finally, a thin strip of skin about 3 inches long that still had the texture and color of human flesh. It was collecting pieces of me, building a costume, learning how to be Marcus Chen. I called Mrs. Holloway immediately. She arrived within an hour, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move. When I showed her the items on the coffee table, her face went pale. "Has it spoken to you?" she asked. "Last night, it said the house demands sacrifice, that the previous tenant is part of the house now." She was silent for a long moment, then sat down heavily in one of the armchairs. "Mr. Chen, I need to tell you the truth, the full truth. You deserve that much, especially now. I'm listening. This house was built in 1847 by a man named Josiah Blackwood. He was a trapper, a frontiersman, and by most accounts, not a good man. He built his home here despite warnings from the local tribes that this land was forbidden. They told him a skinwalker lived in these woods, that it had for generations, that it should not be disturbed." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Josiah didn't listen. He built his house. He lived here for 3 years before the skinwalker came for him. It killed his wife and 2 children first, wearing their faces to torment him. Then it came for Josiah himself. But he survived? Not exactly. The story goes that Josiah made a deal. He performed a ritual using his own family's bodies, binding the skinwalker to the land. The creature couldn't leave, couldn't roam freely anymore. But in exchange, the house itself became cursed, or blessed, depending on your perspective. What kind of deal? Mrs. Holloway met my eyes. The house would stand forever, protected from fire and storm and time itself. Anyone who lived here and followed the rules would be safe from the skinwalker's predation. But every 7 years, the house demands payment. A tenant must be chosen. Someone who's followed the rules, who's proven themselves, who's become part of the house's pattern. And then what?
The first Friday of the month isn't about leaving the house vacant, Mr. Chen. It's about the house feeding. The entities that you saw on your first Friday, those weren't ghosts. They were previous tenants, previous payments. The house absorbs them, makes them part of its structure, its essence. They become guardians, protectors, keeping the skinwalker at bay for another 7 years. My mouth went dry. How long has the previous tenant been here? 6 years and 10 months. You're telling me I have 2 months before the house tries to claim you? Yes, unless we can find an alternative, unless we can break the cycle. Why didn't you tell me this before? I demanded, anger rising. Why would you rent this place knowing? Because the house needs a tenant, Mr. Chen. It needs someone living here, following the rules, keeping it alive. If the house stands empty, if the rituals aren't performed, the skinwalker goes free. And it won't stay in these woods. It will go to the nearest town, the nearest city. It will kill and feed and multiply, because that's what skinwalkers do when they're unbound. So I'm supposed to just sacrifice myself? No, she said firmly. I'm telling you this because there might be another way. The previous tenant didn't know what was coming. He couldn't prepare. But you do. You have 2 months to find a solution, to find a way to break the binding without freeing the skinwalker. How? The basement, she said quietly. The answer is in the basement. Josiah's ritual, his notes, the original binding, it's all down there. That's why Rule 9 exists. The house doesn't want you to find the truth. But if you're going to survive, if you're going to change this, you need to go down there. You've been down there? She nodded. Once, many years ago, when I first learned the truth. It's why I'm missing 2 fingers. She held up her left hand, showing the stumps where her ring and pinky fingers had been. The basement doesn't welcome visitors, but it's possible to survive if you're quick, if you're smart, and if you're willing to pay the price. I looked at the locked basement door, that white portal that I'd been forbidden to open. Behind it lay answers. Behind it lay a possible way out. Behind it lay horrors I couldn't imagine. "What's down there?" I asked. "Everything," Mrs. Halloway replied. "Every secret this house has ever kept. Every soul it's ever claimed. And the Skinwalker's true name. The one thing that can bind it permanently or set it free. And if I free it, then it will kill everyone in a 50-mile radius before anyone realizes what's happening. The local tribes bound it for a reason, Mr. Chen. Before Josiah trapped it, it had killed hundreds. It's patient, ancient, and absolutely merciless." I stood and walked to the basement door, placing my hand flat against the white paint. It was cold, unnaturally so, like touching ice. From beyond it, I could hear faint sounds, whispers, music, something that might have been crying or might have been laughing. "When?" I asked. "The protection is strongest during daylight hours, between noon and 3 p.m. That's when the house is weakest, when its attention is focused elsewhere. That's when you have the best chance. Today?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If you're going to do this, don't wait. The Skinwalker knows you broke Rule 10. It's collecting pieces of you. The longer you wait, the stronger its connection becomes. Soon, it won't need to wait for you to make mistakes. It'll be able to take your form, walk in your skin, even while you're still alive." The thought sent ice through my veins. "Help me," I said. "If I'm going down there, I need help."
Mrs. Halloway shook her head sadly. I can't. The basement allows only one person at a time. That's part of its protection, part of its trap. But I can give you something. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small cloth bag. Salt blessed by a Navajo medicine man, iron filings mixed with silver, a fragment of a Zuni fetish, and this. She produced a knife, old and worn, its handle wrapped in leather that was almost black with age. This belonged to Josiah Blackwood. It's soaked in the blood of the original ritual. It's the only weapon that can truly harm the things in the basement. I took the items, feeling the weight of them, the history they carried. One more thing, she said. The skinwalker told you the previous tenant is part of the house now. That's true. But it didn't tell you that he's still conscious, still aware.
Trapped in the walls, in the floors, in the very bones of this place. If you call to him, he might help you. His name was Daniel Reeves. Why would he help me? Because if you break the binding, you free him too. All of them. Every soul trapped here for the past 170 years. She stood, gathering her things. I'll come back at 3 p.m. If you haven't emerged by then. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I understand. After she left, I spent the morning preparing. I read through the house rules again, looking for hidden meanings, for clues I'd missed. I gathered supplies, a flashlight, though I suspected it wouldn't work down there, matches, a lighter, more salt. I ate a meal, not knowing when I'd eat again. I called my mother and Jake just to hear their voices, to remind myself what was real and what was stolen imitation. At 11:45 a.m., I stood before the basement door. The padlock was still in place, but Mrs. Halloway had left me the key. It turned easily, the lock clicking open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet house. I removed the lock and set it aside. The door stood before me, unlocked, unopened. Beyond it lay truth and terror in equal measure. I placed my hand on the doorknob. It was warm now, not cold, almost alive, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Daniel Reeves, I said softly. If you can hear me, if you're still aware, I'm coming down. I'm going to try to free you, free all of you. The house groaned around me, not threatening, almost hopeful. I turned the knob. The door swung open. Darkness yawned beyond, thick and absolute, like looking into a hole in reality itself. A smell wafted up, earth and age, and something else, something organic and ancient. And from deep in that darkness, I heard a voice, faint, barely audible, but unmistakably human. Hurry, it knows you're coming. I took a breath, gripped Josiah Blackwood's knife, and stepped into the basement. The door closed behind me, and the darkness swallowed me whole.